The first bell rang at exactly 7:45 a.m. Like every weekday morning, Maple Creek Elementary came alive with the sounds that only a school could produce. Children laughing in the hallways, teachers greeting students by name, backpacks dropping onto classroom floors, parents waving goodbye from the parking lot. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The school sat in a quiet Midwestern town of just under 18,000 people. Crime was rare, violence was almost unheard of. Parents never imagined danger waiting behind the school's brick walls. That morning, neither did the children. 42-year-old school nurse Sarah Bennett unlocked the health office before anyone else arrived. She had worked at Maple Creek Elementary for nearly 11 years, long enough to know which first graders were terrified of shots, which fifth graders pretended they weren't scared after falling on the playground, which students had asthma, which carried EpiPens, which secretly visited her office just because they needed someone to listen. Her office wasn't just a clinic. For many children, it was the safest room in the building. Sarah believed something simple. Children remembered how adults made them feel. Sometimes, long after they forgot what adults actually said. She tried to make every frightened child feel safe. Every single day, she began her routine, checking emergency medications, restocking bandages, testing oxygen tanks, replacing batteries and portable radios, verifying emergency contact lists. Everything had its place. Everything had a purpose. Preparation wasn't exciting until the day it became necessary. Principal David Collins knocked lightly on the open office door. "Morning, Sarah," she smiled. "Coffee," he laughed. "You always know." He accepted the paper cup while glancing over today's schedule. "Looks peaceful." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You just guaranteed chaos." He chuckled. "Probably." They both knew schools rarely stayed quiet for long. Someone would scrape a knee. Someone would throw up after lunch. Someone would lose a tooth. Someone would have a bloody nose. Normal school problems. The kind they were happy to solve. By 8:30, the classrooms were full. Kindergarten students practiced writing letters. Third graders worked on multiplication. Fourth graders rehearsed for the upcoming history presentation. The cafeteria staff prepared lunch. Custodians fixed a loose classroom door. Everything followed its familiar rhythm. Predictable. Comforting. Safe. Or so everyone believed. At 9:12 a.m., Sarah treated a little boy who had tripped during recess. His knee barely had a scratch. He cried anyway. She cleaned it carefully, applied a colorful bandage decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. "There. Battle wound repaired." The boy smiled through his tears. "My mom says nurses are superheroes." Sarah laughed softly. "Your mom gives us too much credit." "No." The boy shook his head confidently. "She says you make scary things less scary." Sarah felt her heart warm. Sometimes, children understood people better than adults did. A few minutes later, the office secretary called. "Sarah, can you bring the emergency inhaler to room 204? Emma forgot hers." "I'll be right there." Sarah grabbed the medication and walked into the hallway. Students passed quietly between classrooms with hall passes. Wait, teachers smiled as she walked by. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing felt wrong. Outside, the weather was beautiful. Blue skies. Light breeze. Parents later struggled to remember how such a perfect morning had turned into every family's worst nightmare. At 9:26 a.m., a man parked an older pickup truck across the street from the school. No one noticed. Parents parked there every day. Delivery drivers stopped nearby. Construction crews worked 2 blocks away. Nothing seemed suspicious. The driver remained inside for nearly 4 minutes. Watching. Waiting. At 9:30. Officer Michael Reyes arrived for his scheduled school visit. The town assigned one school resource officer to rotate between schools throughout the district. He stopped by Maple Creek every Thursday morning. Students loved him, especially the younger children. Some ran up just to show him missing teeth or perfect spelling test scores. He never rushed them. He understood something many officers did. Sometimes, building trust mattered more than enforcing rules. Officer Reyes greeted Sarah near the front office. Morning. Busy, she smiled. Just scraped knees. The usual, he nodded. Best kind of day. Neither of them realized those would become the last ordinary words either would speak for several hours. Across campus, second-grade teacher Lisa Harper read aloud from a chapter book. 23 students sat cross-legged on the carpet, every pair of eyes focused on the story, except one. 8-year-old Ethan kept glancing toward the window. Mrs. Harper noticed. "What is it?" He hesitated. "I think someone's yelling outside." She paused, listened. Nothing. Probably workers. "Let's keep reading." The children returned to the story. At 9:37, the front office phone rang. Secretary Melissa answered. "Maple Creek Elementary." Silence, then breathing, heavy breathing. "Hello?" No answer, just breathing. She frowned. The caller disconnected. Wrong number. She thought nothing of it. At 9:41, Sarah returned to the health office. She updated medical records, reorganized supply cabinets, prepared hearing screening paperwork, ordinary tasks, tiny responsibilities, the quiet work that keeps a school running. Then, at exactly 9:43 a.m., everything changed. One sound, loud, sharp, violent, crack. For half a second, Sarah thought something heavy had fallen in the hallway. A maintenance accident. A cart tipping over. Then came another. Crack. Closer. Different. Not an accident. Her entire body froze. Years of emergency preparedness training suddenly collided with instinct. She knew that sound. Gunfire. Before the school intercom could activate. Before alarms began. Before panic spread. Sarah Bennett was already moving. And in the next few minutes, every decision she made would determine whether dozens of children would survive. The third gunshot confirmed what Sarah already feared. This wasn't construction. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a car backfiring. Someone was shooting. Every emergency drill she'd attended over the past decade suddenly rushed back into her mind. Lockdown. Barricade. Silence. Protect the children. Call 911. Wait for law enforcement. Those had always been words printed neatly inside training manuals. Now they were reality. Sarah lunged toward the office door. The hallway outside was still quiet. Most teachers hadn't yet realized what had happened. Several students were changing classes under staff supervision. A little girl carrying library books looked up at Sarah. "Nurse Bennett?" Before Sarah could answer, 3 more shots echoed through the front entrance. Much closer this time. The little girl's eyes widened. A teacher at the end of the hallway screamed. Everything exploded into chaos. The school intercom suddenly crackled. Principal Collins's voice came through, calm, steady, but unmistakably urgent. "Lockdown." A pause, then louder. "Lockdown. This is not a drill. Immediate lockdown." Doors slammed all across the building. Teachers rushed students into classrooms. Lights switched off. Blinds dropped. Children who had practiced this dozens of times suddenly realized. This drill felt different, much different. Sarah grabbed the frightened little girl's hand. "Come with me." They ran into the health office just as another teacher ushered 2 first graders inside. The nurse locked the heavy door. Deadbolt, handle lock, security bar, exactly as trained. But she didn't stop there. She pulled a heavy filing cabinet against the entrance. Then another. Every second mattered. Inside the office were now 5 people. Sarah, the little girl, 2 first graders, a teacher's aide who had been walking down the hall. The youngest child began crying immediately. "I want my mommy." Sarah knelt in front of him. Her own heartbeat felt like a drum inside her chest, but her voice remained gentle. "We're going to play the quiet game. Can you help me?" The little boy nodded through tears. "If we stay very quiet, you'll help keep everyone safe." He covered his own mouth with both hands. The room became almost silent. Outside, running footsteps echoed through the hallway, then shouting. No one inside the office could make out the words. Another gunshot, closer. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. The teacher's aide instinctively gasped. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. "Stay low. Stay quiet." She wasn't whispering because she was afraid. She was whispering because frightened people often matched the emotional tone of the calmest person in the room. If she panicked, everyone else would too. Across the building, Mrs. Harper pushed a bookshelf in front of her classroom door. 23 second graders huddled together beneath reading tables. Several children were crying. One little boy kept asking, "Is this real?" Mrs. Harper wanted to tell him no. She wanted to smile and say it was another practice drill. She couldn't. Instead, she simply said, "I'm right here." Officer Michael Reyes had already drawn his sidearm. The first shots had come from the main entrance. He immediately radioed dispatch. "Active shooter. Maple Creek Elementary." Multiple shots fired. Immediate assistance. His voice remained professional, but dispatch could hear the urgency. Within seconds, every available officer in 3 neighboring towns began racing toward the school. Principal Collins never left the front office. Security camera monitors covered one wall. He watched the gunmen moving through the entrance corridor. A man dressed in dark clothing, carrying a rifle, walking deliberately, not running, not shouting, just walking. That frightened Collins more than anything. He activated the school's emergency alert system for parents, then locked the office doors. The secretary beside him was shaking so badly she could barely dial the phone. Inside the nurse's office, Sarah quietly unlocked the emergency medical cabinet. If someone became injured, she would need supplies immediately: tourniquets, pressure dressings, chest seals, oxygen, everything she'd hoped never to use. She placed them beside the floor, easy to reach, just in case. Her portable radio suddenly crackled. Broken transmissions. North hallway. Keep doors. Officers arriving. Then static. Communications were already breaking down. Sarah checked the office window. It overlooked part of the parking lot. She carefully lifted one corner of the blind. Police cars were arriving. Fast. 1, then 3, then 6. Officers took positions behind vehicles. None rushed blindly inside. They knew exactly how dangerous active shooter situations could become. Every movement had to be deliberate. Every mistake could cost lives. Then Sarah noticed something that made her stomach tighten. The kindergarten playground, visible from her window. Empty. Thank God. Recess had ended just minutes earlier. Had the timing been different, dozens of children would have been completely exposed. The thought nearly took her breath away. Another burst of gunfire erupted. Longer this time, 5 or 6 shots. Then, silence. An awful, heavy silence. Sometimes silence frightened emergency workers more than noise, because silence often meant someone had been hurt. The little girl beside Sarah tugged gently on her sleeve. "Are the bad people coming?" Sarah looked into terrified eyes, searching for certainty. She couldn't promise something she didn't know, so she told the truth. "The police are here, and they're working very hard. We're going to keep protecting each other." The child nodded. Sometimes honesty comforted children more than false reassurance. Officer Reyes moved cautiously down the east hallway. He could hear movement somewhere ahead. Not children. Adult footsteps, slow, measured. Then, a classroom door opened unexpectedly. A frightened teacher stepped halfway into the hallway before seeing Reyes. He motioned sharply. "Back inside." She immediately obeyed. Seconds later, 2 more gunshots struck the wall only yards away. Drywall exploded into the hallway. Reyes returned fire once. The building fell silent again. The confrontation had begun, and deep inside the school, Sarah Bennett realized something terrifying. The shooter wasn't trying to leave. He was moving deeper into the building, toward the classrooms. The hallway outside remained eerily quiet. Too quiet. Sarah had spent years working in emergency medicine before becoming a school nurse. She knew one truth that never changed. Silence during a crisis often meant people were trapped, waiting, bleeding, too afraid to move. She looked around the tiny health office. 5 frightened faces stared back at her. Every one of them depended on her. She had to keep them safe, but somewhere else in the building. Other children might already need medical help. The thought tore at her. Her portable radio crackled again. This time the transmission was clearer. Possible injuries near the library. Officers making entry. Remain secured. Then static swallowed the message. Library. That was only one hallway away. Too close. Far too close. The teacher's aide whispered. Sarah. What if someone out there is hurt? Sarah closed her eyes for a single second. Every instinct she possessed screamed to help. That was what nurses did, run toward injured people. But another part of her mind, the disciplined part trained through years of emergency response, reminded her of something equally important. A dead rescuer couldn't save anyone until police secured the hallway. Leaving this room would only create more victims. It was the hardest lesson emergency medicine ever taught. Sometimes helping meant waiting. Then came another sound. Not gunfire, crying, very faint, somewhere outside the office, a child. Sarah's head snapped toward the door. The crying continued, weak, broken, much closer now. The little boy beside her looked up. Someone's out there. Sarah didn't answer. She was listening. The voice sounded young, maybe 6, maybe 7 years old. The child was alone. The teacher's aide whispered urgently. Don't. It could be a trap. Sarah knew she was right. Police instructors often warned about unpredictable situations during active attacks. Opening the door without knowing what waited outside could place everyone inside at risk. But the crying continued. Miss, help. Barely audible. Sarah recognized something. That wasn't panic. That was exhaustion. The child sounded injured. She crawled toward the office's security monitor. Unlike most classrooms, the nurse's office had a small camera displaying the hallway immediately outside. The image flickered, then stabilized. Sarah felt her stomach drop. A little girl lay against the wall, less than 15 feet from the office door, 2nd grade, maybe 7 years old. One shoe was missing. She wasn't moving much. One hand pressed tightly against her upper arm. Even through the grainy monitor, Sarah could see blood. The teacher's aide covered her mouth. Oh my God. The child looked toward the office door. She knew someone was inside. She tried calling again. Her voice barely carried. Please. Then her head dropped. Sarah looked at the monitor again, then at the children hiding behind her, then back at the monitor. Every second mattered. Blood loss didn't wait for police clearance. Her emergency trauma bag sat beside the cabinet. Tourniquets, bandages, pressure dressings, everything needed to stop severe bleeding. Everything she had trained to use. The distance between her office and the injured girl. Less than 15 feet. 15 feet that suddenly felt like crossing a battlefield. The radio crackled once more. Units clearing East Corridor. The suspect believed moving toward West Wing. Continue lockdown. West Wing. The nurse's office sat in the East Wing. Sarah immediately understood. The shooter had moved away. For the moment, not forever, but long enough to create a tiny window, maybe. She made her decision. The teacher's aide grabbed her wrist. No, you can't. Sarah looked directly into her eyes. If that were your daughter. The woman couldn't answer. Neither of them needed to. Sarah quietly unzipped the trauma bag. She removed only what she absolutely needed. A tourniquet, pressure dressing, medical gloves, trauma shears. Nothing else. Every extra second increased the risk. She turned to the frightened children. I need everyone to stay exactly where you are. No matter what you hear. No matter what happens. The little girl from the hallway began crying softly. Sarah gently touched her shoulder. I'll come back. I promise. She took one slow breath, unlocked the security bar, released the deadbolt, moved the filing cabinet just enough to open the door a few inches. Every sound seemed impossibly loud. Metal scraping, lock clicking, hinges moving. She waited. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Sarah slipped into the hallway. The door closed quietly behind her. The injured child saw her immediately. Tears streamed down the girl's face. Nurse. Sarah stayed low, almost crawling. She reached the child within seconds. Blood soaked through the girl's sleeve. The bullet had passed through the upper arm. Painful, serious, but not immediately fatal. Unless the bleeding continued. Sarah worked with astonishing speed. Gloves, pressure, tourniquet above the wound, bandage, check pulse. The entire procedure took less than 40 seconds. Years of training reduced complex movements into instinct. The little girl trembled violently. "Am I going to die?" Sarah looked directly into her eyes. "No, not today. You hear me? Not today." The child nodded weakly. Then, a door slammed somewhere down the hallway. Sarah froze. Someone was moving. Heavy footsteps echoed from the intersection ahead. Not running, walking, deliberately, closer. Sarah carefully looked around the corner. Her heart nearly stopped. At the far end of the hallway, perhaps 60 yards away, the gunman had reappeared. He hadn't left the east wing after all. He had doubled back, and he was slowly walking toward them. There was no time to think, no time to call for help. Only one choice remained. Sarah lifted the injured little girl into her arms and began running for the office door. The little girl weighed almost nothing. Yet in that moment, she felt impossibly heavy, not because of her size, because Sarah knew she couldn't outrun a bullet. She could only hope she wasn't seen. Keeping low, Sarah lifted the child against her shoulder. "Hold on to me." The girl wrapped one trembling arm around Sarah's neck. Her injured arm remained secured by the tourniquet. Sarah took 3 quick steps, then 5. The health office door seemed miles away, behind her. The footsteps continued, steady, unhurried, the kind of confidence that chilled every instinct she possessed. She resisted every urge to look back. Looking wouldn't make her faster. It would only cost precious seconds. Inside the health office, the children heard movement outside. The youngest boy looked toward the door. "She's coming back." The teacher's aide prayed silently. Every second felt endless. Then, a soft knock, 3 quick taps, exactly as Sarah had instructed during safety drills. The teacher's aide rushed forward. She pulled the filing cabinet aside just enough to unlock the door. Sarah slipped inside, carrying the wounded child. The door slammed shut, locks engaged. The cabinet pushed back into place. Everyone exhaled at once. The little girl was gently lowered onto a treatment cot. Sarah immediately reassessed the injury. The bleeding had slowed dramatically. Good. The tourniquet had done its job. The bullet appeared to have passed cleanly through the upper arm without striking the chest. Painful, terrifying, but survivable. She covered the child with a blanket to help prevent shock. "Can you tell me your name?" "Lily." "How old are you, Lily?" 7. "You're doing wonderfully, Lily. I need you to keep talking to me." Lily nodded through tears. My mom." Sarah gently squeezed her hand. "We're going to make sure you see your mom again." The radio crackled. "Officer down." Static. "Suspect moving." Another burst of interference. Then, "Medical personnel remain secured until officers declare the area safe." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Every instinct told her to help, but the order existed for a reason. The building still wasn't secure. Across the school, Officer Reyes took cover behind a concrete support column near the library. He had briefly spotted the attacker. The distance had been too great, too many classroom doors, too many unknowns. His priority wasn't pursuit, it was containment, keeping the attacker away from locked classrooms until backup officers could coordinate their response. He radioed calmly. "East hallway appears secure. Suspect now believed in central corridor." Additional officers acknowledged immediately. The response was becoming organized. Room by room, hallway by hallway, exactly as they had trained. Inside room 204, Emma, the student Sarah had delivered an inhaler to earlier that morning, sat quietly beside her classmates. Mrs. Jensen had turned off every light. The children remained hidden beneath their desks. Nobody spoke. One little boy began crying silently. Emma reached over and held his hand. Neither child said a word. Sometimes that was enough. Back in the nurse's office, Sarah checked every child for injuries. Only Lily had been physically wounded. The others showed different signs: rapid breathing, shaking hands, blank stares, acute fear. She recognized them all. Trauma affected every child differently. Some cried, some became unusually quiet. Others stared into space. There was no correct reaction, only human ones. Suddenly, the building's fire alarm began blaring. The piercing sound echoed through every hallway. The younger children instinctively stood. We have to go. Sarah immediately shook her head. No. Stay exactly where you are. The teacher's aide looked confused. The alarm, Sarah answered without hesitation. Until police tell us otherwise, we stay here. Emergency responders had warned staff during annual training that alarms during violent incidents could not always be trusted as a signal to evacuate. The safest choice remained the same. Locked door, hidden position, silence. Minutes passed. No one knew how many. Time had stopped making sense. Every distant sound caused everyone inside the room to freeze. Every radio transmission seemed both hopeful and terrifying. Then, a loud voice echoed somewhere down the hallway. Police. If anyone can hear me, identify yourself. Sarah didn't move. Neither did the teacher's aide. Anyone could shout those words. Training had been clear. Never unlock a door based on a voice alone. Wait for verification. The radio came alive again. This is dispatch. East hallway officers now outside the nurse's office. Occupants remain inside until instructed. Sarah finally allowed herself a small breath of relief. Someone knew where they were. Help had reached their hallway. A firm knock sounded. Officer Reyes, we've secured this corridor. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked the question every staff member had been trained to ask. What's today's verification code? There was a brief pause. Then the officer answered with the correct emergency challenge phrase that had been distributed only to school staff and responding law enforcement. The teacher's aide nodded. It's him. Sarah carefully moved the filing cabinet, unlocked the deadbolt, opened the door only a few inches. Officer Reyes stood there, wearing body armor. 2 additional officers covered the hallway behind him. His face was streaked with sweat. Nurse Bennett, we need you. She looked toward Lily. The child. We'll have officers stay with these kids. Reyes nodded toward another officer. They're safe now. Then his expression changed. We have multiple injured near the library. We need every medical hand we've got. Sarah looked once at the frightened children inside the office. The little boy with the dinosaur bandage smiled weakly. You have to help them. Sarah smiled back. I'll be back. She picked up her trauma bag, stepped into the hallway, and for the first time since hearing that first gunshot, she saw what fear had done to the school she loved. Broken glass covered the floor. Emergency lights flashed against smoke from a damaged ceiling panel. Abandoned backpacks lay scattered across the hallway. Classroom doors remained tightly locked. The familiar halls of Maple Creek Elementary no longer looked like a school. They looked like the aftermath of a battlefield. And Sarah's hardest work was only beginning. Officer Reyes led the way. 2 officers moved ahead. One covered the rear. Sarah stayed in the center of the formation. Her trauma bag bounced against her shoulder as they hurried through the hallway. Only now did she fully understand how much damage had been done. Glass littered the floor. Ceiling tiles had fallen. Bullet holes scarred several walls. Sprinkler pipes had ruptured in one corridor, leaving puddles of water reflecting the flashing emergency lights. The familiar school looked unrecognizable. They reached the library entrance. 3 officers had already established a security perimeter. Another officer waved them forward. Over here. Sarah immediately dropped to one knee. The first patient was Mr. Harrison, the school librarian. He was conscious, pale, breathing rapidly. A wound to his shoulder had caused significant blood loss. A teacher knelt beside him, pressing a sweatshirt against the injury. You've done exactly the right thing, Sarah told her. Without wasting another second, she replaced the makeshift dressing with sterile trauma bandages. Mr. Harrison? He opened his eyes. How many fingers? 2. Good. Stay with me. His pulse was fast, but steady. She noted the time. Applied a pressure dressing. Checked circulation. He's stable enough for transport. One officer immediately relayed the information over his radio. Second patient. Sarah hurried across the room. Assistant Principal Karen Mitchell sat against a bookshelf. A deep cut across her forehead had left her covered in blood. Head wounds often looked much worse than they actually were. Sarah carefully examined her. Any dizziness? A little. Nausea? Karen shook her head. Can you move your fingers? Yes. Toes? Yes. Good. She wrapped the wound, checked her pupils, likely a concussion, painful but manageable. Karen grabbed Sarah's wrist. The children, they're locked down, Sarah nodded. They're being protected. Karen closed her eyes in relief. Another officer approached quickly. We've cleared the cafeteria. No injured there. Sarah felt a small wave of hope. Every cleared classroom meant more children were safe. The radio came alive. Command to all units. Suspect contained in West Classroom Wing. Continue room by room evacuation of secured areas. The operation had entered a new phase. Officers were no longer simply searching. They were rescuing. Outside, the school parking lot had become an enormous emergency command center. Ambulances lined both entrances. Fire engines blocked surrounding roads. Parents had begun arriving after receiving emergency alerts. Police kept them behind barricades several hundred yards away. Many cried openly. Some repeatedly called their children's phones. Others simply stared toward the building, waiting, praying. No parent knew whether their child was safe. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Inside, Sarah and another paramedic established a temporary treatment area in the library. Every injured person would be assessed before being transported. Color-coded triage tags appeared one by one: immediate, delayed, minor. Each decision had to be made quickly, but carefully. Lives depended on accurate priorities. Officer Reyes stepped inside. We're beginning classroom evacuations. Can you receive students here before they move outside? Sarah nodded. We're ready. Within minutes, the first classroom arrived. 21 third graders, walking in a single line, hands resting gently on one another's shoulders, exactly as they had practiced during safety drills. Their teacher tried to appear calm, but tears streamed silently down her face. The children noticed. One little girl reached up and hugged her. We're okay now. The teacher finally broke down crying. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You kept them safe. Another classroom followed. Then another. Each group entered silently. Some children cried, others looked completely numb. A few smiled with relief the moment they saw uniformed officers. Many immediately searched the room for familiar faces, friends, teachers, siblings. Sarah noticed one little boy standing completely still. He hadn't spoken since entering. She knelt beside him. What's your name? No answer. She tried again. I'm Sarah. Still nothing. His teacher whispered. He hasn't spoken since lockdown started. Yeah, Sarah simply stayed beside him. After nearly a minute, he quietly asked, Can I call my dad? Sarah smiled gently. As soon as it's safe. He nodded. That single sentence told her everything. Shock was beginning to wear off. Hope was returning. The evacuation continued with remarkable discipline. Teachers counted students before leaving classrooms. Again in the hallway. Again at the library. Again before boarding buses. No one relied on memory. Every child had to be accounted for. Sarah admired the professionalism around her. Months of emergency planning, countless lockdown drills, endless staff meetings everyone once complained about. Now they were saving lives. Preparation had become protection. A firefighter entered carrying bottled water. Parents are asking about their kids. Sarah looked toward the windows. Hundreds of worried mothers and fathers waited beyond the police line. Some held stuffed animals. Others clutched children's jackets they had grabbed while rushing out of their homes. Every one of them wanted the same thing: to hug their child. Nothing else mattered. The radio crackled once again. Every officer nearby immediately fell silent. Command to all units. A brief pause, then the words everyone had been waiting to hear. The suspect has been located. Another pause. Threat no longer active. For several seconds, no one moved. The words seemed almost impossible to believe. Then another transmission followed. Continue systematic evacuation. Maintain security. The danger had ended, but the work was far from over. Sarah looked around the library. Children, teachers, police officers, paramedics, firefighters. Everyone was exhausted. Everyone was emotionally drained, yet no one stopped working. because dozens of frightened children still needed reassurance. Dozens of families were still waiting outside, and before this day could finally end, every child had to make it home. The announcement spread through the school one hallway at a time. The threat has ended. For the first time in nearly an hour, teachers unlocked classroom doors. Some did so with shaking hands. Others stood frozen for several seconds before finding the strength to turn the key. Many had spent the entire lockdown standing between the door and their students. Now, they had to guide those same children back into the light. Officer Reyes spoke quietly over the hallway. "Teachers, remain with your classes. We'll escort everyone outside. No one leaves alone." One classroom after another began moving. Children walked in single file. Some held hands. Others clutched stuffed animals from reading corners. Several carried backpacks they had grabbed without thinking. A few simply reached for their teachers. Nobody complained. Nobody ran. The silence was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Hundreds of children, and almost no one spoke. Sarah remained in the library treatment area. The last ambulance had just departed with Mr. Harrison and Assistant Principal Mitchell. Both were expected to recover. That news alone lifted everyone's spirits. A paramedic approached her. "We've got one more patient." Sarah followed him. Sitting quietly in the corner was Officer Reyes. Only then did she notice blood soaking through the sleeve of his uniform. "You've been hit." He glanced down as if seeing it for the first time. "Just a graze." Sarah wasn't convinced. She carefully cut away part of the sleeve. The bullet had torn across his upper arm. Painful, but fortunately superficial. "You should have told someone." He smiled weakly. "There were kids first." Sarah cleaned the wound, applied fresh bandages. "You know," she said softly, "you're allowed to be a patient too." Reyes chuckled. "Maybe after today." Outside, the reunification area had been established in the football field across the street. Police officers checked identification before releasing every student. No shortcuts, no exceptions. Parents waited anxiously in long lines. Some had been standing there for nearly an hour. Every minute felt like another lifetime. The first reunification happened at exactly 11:04 a.m. A little boy spotted his mother. "Mom!" He broke into a run. She dropped to her knees before he reached her. Neither spoke. They simply held each other. Nearby officers quietly looked away. Several wiped tears from their own faces. One reunion became 10, then 20, then 50. Each one looked different. Each one ended the same way. Tight embraces, relieved tears, grateful silence. Sarah finally stepped outside. The sunlight almost hurt her eyes. It was strange. The world looked exactly as it had 2 hours earlier. Blue sky, gentle breeze, birds still chirping in nearby trees. Nature hadn't noticed what had happened, but everyone standing on school grounds knew life would never feel quite the same again. A young girl suddenly ran toward her. "Lily!" The little girl with the injured arm. She had already been treated inside an ambulance. Her arm rested securely in a sling. Before anyone could stop her, she wrapped her good arm around Sarah's waist. "You came back." Sarah knelt, despite her own exhaustion. "I told you I would." Lily looked up. "I wasn't scared after I saw you." Sarah felt tears, threatened. For the first time that day, she hugged the little girl carefully. "You're one of the bravest 7-year-olds I've ever met." Lily smiled. "My mom says nurses keep promises." Sarah looked toward Lily's parents. They stood nearby, crying openly. Her mother walked over. There are moments when words become too small. This was one of them. She simply embraced Sarah. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. Finally, Lily's father whispered, "Thank you for bringing our daughter home." Sarah quietly answered, "It was an honor." As the reunification continued, Principal Collins began checking attendance one final time. Every classroom list, every bus roster, every medical report, every student, every staff member. He refused to stop counting until every name had an answer beside it. Finally, just after noon, he closed the final clipboard. He looked toward Officer Reyes. Then, toward Sarah, his voice cracked. Every child is accounted for. No applause followed, no celebration, only a deep, collective breath. The promise every teacher makes silently at the beginning of each school year, to bring every child home, had been fulfilled. News crews had gathered outside the police perimeter. Television helicopters circled overhead. Reporters spoke into cameras. National networks interrupted regular programming across the country. Millions watched breaking news alerts. But inside the reunification center, none of that mattered. Parents weren't thinking about headlines. Children weren't thinking about cameras. Teachers weren't thinking about interviews. They were simply grateful to be together. Late that afternoon, Sarah finally sat down for the first time since hearing the first gunshot. She looked at her hands. Small streaks of dried blood remained despite repeated washing. Her muscles ached. Her uniform was stained. She felt completely drained. Officer Reyes sat beside her. "You saved that little girl's life." Sarah looked across the field, where Lily laughed softly with her parents. "No," she answered. "We all saved each other today." The officer nodded. He knew she was right. Firefighters, teachers, custodians, secretaries, dispatchers, police officers, paramedics, parents, everyone had become part of one enormous effort. No single person had carried the day alone. It had taken an entire community, and yet, there was one truth that no one who witnessed the events of that morning would ever forget. When the very first gunshot shattered an ordinary Thursday, before the sirens, before the command posts, before the armored officers entered the building, one school nurse had heard the danger. And instead of running away, she had spent every minute afterward running toward frightened children. For most people, the story ended when the police announced the school was safe. The television cameras packed their equipment. News anchors moved on to the next story. The flashing emergency lights eventually disappeared. But for the people who had lived through that morning, the hardest part was only beginning. 3 days later, the school remained closed. The hallways were silent. Desks sat exactly where children had left them. Half-finished math worksheets still rested on classroom tables. Crayons remained scattered across kindergarten floors. Lunch trays sat untouched in the cafeteria freezer. Time seemed frozen inside the building. Outside, life continued. Inside, everyone was still trying to understand what had happened. Sarah received dozens of phone calls. Some came from parents, others from former students she'd cared for years earlier. Many simply wanted to hear her voice. One voicemail stayed with her. It came from the mother of a fourth-grade boy. My son said. The woman struggled to continue through tears. He wasn't brave because he wasn't protecting anyone. Sarah listened to the message twice. Then she called the mother back. Now, when the little boy answered the phone, she said something he would remember for the rest of his life. Being brave doesn't mean you stop being scared. It means you do exactly what your teachers told you. You stayed quiet. You protected your classmates. You listened. That made you brave. The boy didn't answer immediately. Finally, he whispered, "I thought heroes weren't afraid." Sarah smiled softly. The people who are never afraid usually don't understand danger. The bravest people are often the ones who are scared the most. They simply choose to do the right thing anyway. Counselors arrived from neighboring school districts. Entire classrooms met with trauma specialists. Some children wanted to talk. Others refused to speak at all. One first grader cried every time a school bell rang. Another became frightened whenever someone knocked on a door. Several students couldn't sleep. Many parents couldn't either. Healing, no one realized, would take far longer than anyone expected. Sarah attended every counseling session offered to staff. At first, she believed she didn't need them. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I was just doing my job." The psychologist gently asked, "Have you slept through the night since it happened?" Sarah hesitated. "No." "Do loud noises startle you now?" "Yes." "Do you keep replaying moments in your head?" "All the time." The psychologist nodded. "That's why you're here." For the first time, Sarah realized something important. Medical professionals know how to treat other people's wounds. They often struggle to admit when they have wounds of their own. A week later, Mr. Harrison was discharged from the hospital. The bullet had narrowly missed major arteries. Doctors expected him to make a full recovery before going home. He asked to stop by the school. The police had already released the building. Sarah met him outside. His arm rested in a sling. Walking remained difficult. He smiled anyway. "I owe you my life." Sarah shook her head. "No. You owe your doctors." He laughed quietly. "No. I owe the woman who stopped me from bleeding to death before I ever reached them." Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, Mr. Harrison looked toward the library windows. "I keep thinking," he said, "what would have happened if you had run?" Sarah looked at the same building. "I've thought about that too." Then she answered honestly, "I don't think I had time to think. I only had time to act." Assistant Principal Mitchell returned to work several weeks later. He carried a slight limp, nothing else. At the first staff meeting, he stood before the faculty. Many teachers had tears in their eyes simply seeing him alive. Mitchell looked around the room. "I've been called lucky," he began. "I don't think that's the right word." He turned toward Sarah. "I think I was cared for." Then he faced everyone again. "We often think schools are protected by locks, security cameras, and emergency plans. Those things matter. But after what happened, I've learned schools are really protected by people. Teachers who shield children, custodians who guide classrooms to safety, office staff who stay calm, police officers who move toward danger, and nurses," he paused, "who refuse to leave the injured." No one applauded immediately. The room simply became quiet. Sometimes, silence carries more respect than applause ever could. The students eventually returned. The first morning back felt almost like the first day of school. Children walked slowly through the entrance. Parents hugged them a little longer than usual. Teachers greeted every student by name. Many children looked toward the nurse's office as they passed. Some waved. Others smiled shyly. Several simply wanted to know one thing. "Is Nurse Sarah here?" When they saw her standing in the doorway, they visibly relaxed. To children, routine feels like safety. Seeing familiar faces reminded them that school could once again become a place for learning instead of fear. Throughout the year, Sarah noticed something unexpected. Visits to the health office increased dramatically. Not because children were seriously sick, but because many simply wanted reassurance. "I have a headache. My stomach hurts. I don't feel good." Sometimes, nothing was medically wrong. They simply needed 5 quiet minutes, a glass of water, someone to listen, someone to remind them. "You are safe." Sarah never rushed those conversations. She understood what many adults overlooked. Trauma doesn't always speak through words. Sometimes, it whispers through stomach aches, through headaches, through children asking to call home. Healing requires patience, not just medicine. Months later, letters began arriving. Some came from parents, others from children, crayon drawings filled with hearts, handwritten notes, construction paper folded into greeting cards. One second grader wrote, "Dear Nurse Sarah, thank you for fixing people. When I grow up, I want to help scared people too." The spelling wasn't perfect. The handwriting wandered across the page. Sarah placed it inside her desk drawer. She would keep it forever. Then came the invitation she never expected. The state governor planned to recognize everyone involved in the emergency response: teachers, police officers, firefighters, EMS crews, hospital staff, and one school nurse. Sarah almost declined. "I don't need recognition," she told Principal Collins. He smiled gently. "This isn't only for you. It's for every child who needs to know that kindness deserves to be celebrated." She finally agreed, not for herself, but for them. The convoy reached the elementary school just after dawn. For the first time since the shooting began, there was silence. Not true silence. The kind filled with distant sirens, helicopters overhead, and hundreds of exhausted children crying into their parents' shoulders. But compared to the chaos inside Jefferson Ridge Elementary only an hour earlier, it felt almost peaceful. Sarah finally allowed herself to stop moving. Her legs trembled, her hands steady through every emergency, Every bandage, every decision that morning suddenly began to shake uncontrollably. She leaned against the side of an ambulance, trying to catch her breath. A paramedic noticed. "You okay?" She nodded automatically. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. She hadn't processed any of it. Not Emma clinging to her, not Tyler bleeding in the hallway, not the terrified faces of 24 children hiding inside the nurse's office while gunfire echoed through the school. She had simply kept going because stopping hadn't been an option. Now that everyone was safe, everything hit her at once. A blanket was wrapped around her shoulders. Someone handed her a bottle of water. She stared at it for several seconds before realizing she was supposed to drink it. Nearby, reunification had already begun. Parents were arriving from every direction. Some ran across the parking lot the moment they spotted their children. Others collapsed onto their knees before wrapping their sons and daughters in desperate hugs. Teachers cried openly. Police officers who had remained expressionless all morning quietly wiped away tears behind patrol cars. Sarah watched family after family reunite. Every hug reminded her why she had refused to leave that office. Then she heard footsteps behind her. "Miss Collins?" She turned. Emma stood there with her parents. Her mother was crying so hard she could barely speak. Her father stepped forward instead. "I don't know how to thank you." Sarah smiled weakly. "You don't have to. He told us," the father said, looking toward Emma. "He told us you carried him when he couldn't walk." Sarah looked at the little boy. Emma still held the stuffed rabbit tightly against his chest. "I was scared," he admitted quietly. "I know. But you weren't." Sarah paused. Then she knelt, so they were eye level. "I was terrified." Emma looked surprised. "You were?" "More scared than I've ever been." "Then why didn't you run away?" Sarah thought for a long moment. "Because you needed someone who wouldn't." The little boy wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't a dramatic embrace. Just a child thanking the person who had refused to abandon him. Sarah closed her eyes. For the first time that day, she cried. Hours later, investigators finally pieced together what had happened. Security footage showed Sarah leaving a secure evacuation route 3 separate times. Each time had been to rescue children trapped elsewhere. According to emergency protocols, she should have continued toward safety. Instead, she repeatedly moved toward danger. One responding officer summarized it perfectly. Most people escape from gunfire. She walked into it. The body camera footage from multiple officers confirmed what witnesses had already described. Sarah had remained remarkably calm, even while rounds were still being fired nearby, even while treating injured children, even while coordinating evacuations. One officer later admitted something that stunned reporters. "I honestly thought she was some kind of tactical medic. When someone told me she was the school nurse, I couldn't believe it." By afternoon, television news helicopters circled overhead. National reporters arrived. Every major network wanted interviews. Parents gave them one name: Sarah Collins. The problem, nobody could find her. She wasn't speaking with reporters. She wasn't holding press conferences. She wasn't standing beside politicians. She was inside the elementary school gym, helping volunteers organize donated blankets. When someone informed her the media wanted to interview her immediately, she simply shook her head. "There are families looking for prescription medications. They need help first." The volunteer stared. "You know they're calling you a hero." Sarah didn't even look up. "I'm a nurse. I did my job." But others disagreed. Teachers began sharing their own stories. Mrs. Alvarez, the third-grade teacher, described how Sarah had sprinted across an exposed hallway to reach 2 terrified students frozen behind a classroom door. Coach Daniels recalled seeing Sarah using cabinets to shield children while calmly directing officers through unfamiliar hallways. The school custodian told investigators something no one else had noticed. After every child entered the nurse's office, Sarah had quietly counted them, again, and again, and again. She refused to leave until every name matched her mental list, not because anyone ordered her to, because she couldn't bear the thought of leaving one child behind. Late that evening, Chief Morrison visited the temporary family assistance center. He found Sarah sitting alone with a cup of untouched coffee. He removed his cap. "I owe you an apology." She looked confused. "For what?" "When you told me there were still kids inside. I thought emotion was clouding your judgment." He paused. "You were right. I was wrong." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said softly, "We both wanted the same thing. Getting them home." The chief nodded, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The final count. Sarah unfolded it carefully. Every student, every teacher, every staff member, accounted for. She stared at the page, read it twice, then exhaled. It was the deepest breath she'd taken all day. Thank God. Not, "We did it." Not, "I saved them." Only, "Thank God." The following morning, America woke to headlines that spread across every newspaper, television station, and online news site. School nurse credited with saving dozens. During shooting. Medical training and courage prevent greater tragedy. One woman's decisions changed everything. Reporters searched through Sarah's background looking for extraordinary accomplishments. They found remarkably ordinary things. She had worked at Jefferson Ridge Elementary for 13 years, never missed a school concert if a student asked her to attend, kept extra winter gloves in her office every year, bought snacks with her own money for children who skipped breakfast, remembered birthdays, learned siblings' names, attended graduations, comforted grieving families, celebrated recoveries, pulled them thousands of tiny acts of kindness. Long before the nation learned her name, one former student, now in college, posted something online that's quickly spread across the country. "When I was 9, Nurse Collins sat with me for 3 hours because I was scared my mom wouldn't survive surgery. She didn't have to. That's just who she is." Soon, hundreds of former students shared similar stories. The shooting hadn't created a hero. It had simply revealed one. 3 weeks later, classes resumed in a temporary building. The first morning back was emotional. Children hesitated before entering classrooms. Teachers smiled through tears. Security was tighter than ever. As Sarah unlocked the nurse's office, she noticed something taped to the door. It was a giant poster, covered in hundreds of handwritten notes. "Thank you for staying. You made me brave. I wasn't alone because of you. My mom says you're our angel." She read every single one, then quietly placed the poster inside her office instead of taking it home, or because she believed it belonged to the school, not to her. What happened that day would become part of Jefferson Ridge's history forever. But the children deserved to remember more than fear. They deserved to remember compassion, courage, hope, and one nurse who proved that real heroism isn't measured by medals or headlines. Sometimes, it's measured by the simple decision to stay beside frightened children when every instinct tells you to run. In the years that followed, many of those students would struggle to describe exactly what they remembered from that terrible morning. Some remembered the loud noises. Some remembered the flashing police lights. Some remembered hiding. But nearly every child remembered one thing with perfect clarity. A calm voice saying, "Stay close. I've got you." And because someone kept that promise, dozens of children grew up to live the rest of their lives. Some became teachers. Some became firefighters. Some became nurses themselves, carrying forward the same courage they had witnessed when they were only children. They would never forget the woman who showed them that courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to protect others despite it, and that lesson saved far more lives than anyone could ever count.